Klayim Paragvav Mishnah Aleph. Ezehu Aris. What arrangement of a trained vines is considered an aris? A vineyard has a work area around it 4 amos wide, where other species may not be planted. Now, vines are grown in one of two ways. Either they are left to grow on their own, or they're directed to grow in a structure such as a wall or the like. The second method is known as training the vine. Earlier in the Masechta, the Mishnah discussed vines grown through the first method. This parak is going to discuss vines grown through the second method, that's trained vines. As with other vines, trained vines are considered a vineyard when certain requirements are fulfilled. However, these requirements are not the same as those of other vineyards. Regardless, when the requirements for a vineyard of trained vines are fulfilled, such a vineyard, which is known as an aris, has a work area of daled amos, where other species may not be planted. So, Ezuhu Aris, what arrangement of trained vines is considered an Aris? If someone plants a row of 5 vines next to a wall that's 10 tvachim high, and trains the vines on the wall, or next to a ditch that's at least 10 tvachim deep and 4 tvachim wide, and trains the vines across the opening of the ditch, the vines are supported by the walls of the ditch on both sides and hang down into the ditch. Either of these arrangements of vines is considered an aris. In either of these cases, we give it daled amos for its work area, where planting other minim is going to be aser. Normally, there must be 2 rows of vines to qualify as a vineyard according to Beis Hillel. However, vines grown on a structure such as a wall were often grown in a single row and were given the status of a vineyard with only 1 row. The Mishnah is going to discuss how the 4 amma work area of an aris is measured when the vines are planted next to the wall of a field. So Beis Shammai say we measure 4 ammas from the base of the vines out to the field. For example, if the vines were planted 1 amma east of the wall and the owner wishes to plant a different species to the west of the wall, he must distance those plants 3 ammas from the wall. Beis Hillel say we measure 4 ammas from the wall out to the field. That is, other species may be planted to the west of the wall only if they are distant at least 4 amos from the wall. Although a wall is normally considered a separation between plants and allows planting even without further distancing, here the wall is serving the vines and supporting them, not separating them. Therefore, it doesn't create a separation between them. It's not a mechitza. Rabbi Yechim ben Nuri, Toyim kol ha'omrim kain ela im yesham aba amos meikik fanav lageder noisen leas avedasav is a reas hamoiser. What does this mean? The Tanakama's position is based on a tradition linking a row of trained vines with a 4 amma measure. This Mesorah teaches that a single row of 5 trained vines qualifies as an aris and requires a 4 amma workspace. The Mishnah quotes a different Tana who holds that the understanding of a row of trained vines with a 4 amma measure is a totally different halacha. Rabbi Yechim ben Nuri says, Toyim kol ha'omrim kain, all those who say like this, that the Mesorah that we had that teaches that a single row of 5 trained vines qualifies as an aris are mistaken, for a single row of trained vines does not qualify as an aris. Rabbi Yechim ben Nuri insists that Beis Hillel, who say that as a general rule there must be at least 2 rows of vines in order for the laws of a vineyard to apply, will not say that a single row of trained vines can qualify as an aris. Therefore, the vines are regarded as individual vines. Ella yesham arba amis be'ikuk fanav laged. Rather, the Mesorah that we had how to understand this Mishnah is that if there are 4 amos from the base of the vines to the wall upon which they are trained, we give each vine its work area, the work area of a single vine, as we're going to explain in the next Mishnah, where it's prohibited to plant other species. The grower may plant other species in the rest of the area between the vines and the wall. According to Rabbi Yechim ben Nuri, one may plant the area between the vines and the wall as long as he leaves a work area of 6 tvachim around each vine. However, he teaches that there's a halachic tradition that this is allowed only if there's at least 4 amos between the wall and the base of the vines, and planting on the other side of the vines, the side that is further away from the wall, is also permitted in his opinion, as long as the plants are distant 6 tvachim from the vines. Rabbi Yechim ben Nuri is taking the same position as Rabbi Yossi in Perek Hamish Nadalet. There, Rabbi Yossi ruled that when a single grapevine is planted in a neka, in a cleft, that's a crack in the ground, the cleft must contain at least 4 amos. By 4 amos, in order for it to be permitted to plant other species anywhere in the hole. The reason for this is that the entire area is considered secondary to the vine and is thus prohibited for other species. Here too, unless there are at least 4 amos between the base of the vines and the wall, the entire area is considered secondary to the vine and is prohibited for other species. The Mishnah now defines the work area of a single vine. How much is the work area of a single vine? Shisha Tvachim Charuach, 6 Tvachim in each direction. The radius of 6 Tvachim around the vine's trunk may not be planted with other species. Rabbi Kiva Omer Shlosh, Rabbi Kiva says 3 Tvachim in each direction. Okay. Mishnah Beis. Aris Shehu Yotzei Min HaMadrego. The previous Mishnah discussed an aris, a group of vines that are trained on a wall. Commonly, a lattice work of crisscrossing strips of wood extends outwards from the top of the wall, forming a roof over the area next to the wall. The vines grow along the rooftop lattice. Such a structure is known as a trellis. This Mishnah discusses the case of an aris that is on a raised area of land and extends over a field that is on a lower level. We have like a sukkah, and like the schach is the vines, and there's different zachen growing on the ground underneath. So aris shehu yotzei min hamadrega, an aris that extends outwards from a raised area of land, so that the vines attached to the aris form a canopy over the field next to it. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, if someone is standing on the ground of the field, can reach up and harvest all the grapes of the aris without climbing onto a ladder or onto the raised area, then it answers 4 amos in the field beyond the area beneath the aris, because the entire area is considered a site of the vineyard. As we learned in the previous Mishnah, it's also to plant another species within 4 amos of an aris. If the grapes can be harvested without climbing onto a ladder or onto an elevated area, the entire area beneath the vines is considered the site of the vineyard. Accordingly, it is also to plant other species not only directly beneath the vines, but also 4 amos beyond the roofed area. The same halacha applies where the aris is on the same level as a field. The Mishnah is teaching that even when the vines are planted on a separate raised area, if the overhead vines can be reached without climbing, it's also to plant other species 4 amos beyond the roofed area. Although it's also to plant other species within 4 amos of the overhead vines, if someone violated this halacha and planted in the area, only what is planted within 6 tvachim of the area becomes aser. But if he's not able to reach all the grapes without using a ladder or going up to a higher level, the aris asers planting other species opposite it, that is only in the part of the field that's directly beneath it, but not in the 4 amos beyond that area. If the grapes cannot be reached while standing in the field, the area beneath the vine is not treated as part of the aris, and only the area that lies beneath the overhead vines is forbidden for planting. In fact, planting is going to be permitted on the lower level, even within 4 amos of the base of the vines growing on the upper level, since it's not on the same level. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, the Mishnah now turns to discuss a standard vineyard, not an aris. When planting other species next to a vineyard, they must be distanced 4 amos from the vineyard. When planting next to an individual vine, however, the required distance is only 6 tvachim. In order to be considered a vineyard, there must be at least 2 rows of vines according to Beis Hillel. The Mishnah addresses whether 2 rows of vines combine to create a vineyard if one is planted on the ground and the other is planted on a raised area. So Rabbi Eliezer says that a similar halacha applies to a person who plants 1 row of vines on the ground and 1 row on a raised area. If the raised area is 10 tvachim higher than the ground, the row on the raised area does not combine with the row on the ground below to form a vineyard. That is, each row is considered separately. Since the vineyard must contain at least 2 rows, the rows of vines are not considered a vineyard, and other species may be planted 6 tvachim away. But if the raised area is not 10 tvachim higher than the ground, the row on the raised area does not combine with the row on the ground below to form a vineyard. Therefore, other species may not be planted within 4 amos of the vines. Mishnah Gimel, Hamadla es hagefen al miktas afif yoros. The previous Mishnayos discussed an aris, a group of at least 5 trained vines. When such vines are trained on a trellis or on some other things, other species must be distanced 4 amos from the edge. This Mishnah discusses a single trellised vine. While other species do not need to be distanced 4 amos from the edge of the trellis, it's also to plant other species underneath the vine. The Mishnah discusses planting beneath the part of the trellis where the vine has not yet reached. So if a person trains a grapevine on part of the latticework canopy of the trellis, he may not plant other types of seed even beneath the rest of the canopy, since the purpose of the trellis is to serve the grapevine. The owner considered it secondary to the grapevine, therefore it has the same status as the grapevine. It is therefore also to plant another min of seeds beneath the entire trellis, even beneath the section where the grapevine is not presently growing. Nevertheless, if he did plant other seeds under the section of the roof where the vine is not yet growing, it does not cause the grapes on the other species to become aser. This is true only if he planted other seeds beneath the area where the vine is not yet grown. If he plants beneath the vine itself, it becomes aser b'hana, as is k'lei hakarim. However, if the vine grew further and its new growth went out onto the part of the trellis that is located above the other species, the produce becomes forbidden. The other produce is now located directly below a grapevine and therefore becomes forbidden. The produce becomes asur once it has increased 1/200th of its new total size after the grapevine extended over, as we explain in Parak Hay. The same halacha would apply when instead of using a trellis, a person trains a grapevine on part of a non-fruit-bearing tree. In a similar fashion to the trellis discussed above, since the tree is barren, doesn't bear fruits, the owner views it as secondary to the grapevine. It's part of the vine. The tree therefore has the same status as the grapevine and is also to plant other seeds under it, even under part of the tree where the grapevine is not yet growing. As in the earlier case, if he did plant other seeds beneath the area where the vine was not yet growing, he was only over the isser, but the grapes and the other pears did not become asur. However, if he planted beneath the vines themselves, the produce does become asur rahana. The halacha of fruit trees will be discussed in the next Mishnah, and the definition of an ilan srak will be discussed in Mishnah Hay. Mishnah Dalet. Hamadle es hagefen al miktas ilan meichel. The previous Mishnah ended with the case of a person who trained a grapevine on a non-fruit-bearing tree, on an ilan srak. In that case, since the tree serves the grapevine, the owner considers it secondary to the grapevine. Therefore, the barren tree has the status of the grapevine, and it's also to plant other peiros, other minim, even under the part of the tree where the grapevine is not yet growing. So the Mishnah now discusses the case of a person who trains a grapevine on a fruit-bearing tree. If a person trains a grapevine on part of a fruit-bearing tree, it's mutter to plant seed beneath the rest of the tree where the vines have not yet reached. As a fruit-bearing tree, such a tree serves its own useful purpose. It's not to serve the grapevine, it's its own thing. Therefore, unlike the ilan srak discussed in the previous Mishnah, the owner does not view it as secondary to the grapevine. Therefore, while it is asur to plant other species beneath the parts of the tree upon which the vine has spread, there is no isser against planting other species beneath the rest of the tree, not the grapevine, but under the tree. And if the vine then grew further onto the part of the tree that is over the other seeds, he must turn the vine back to where it originally was, so it should not overhang the other seeds. In fact, once he has turned back the vine, he may even plant the area that had been under the overhanging vines further, and we're not concerned that the vine will again spread out and overhang the other species. It happened that Rabbi Yeshua went to visit Rabbi Shmuel in the town of Oziz. Rabbi Shmuel showed him a grapevine trained on part of a fig tree. Rabbi Shmuel said to him, may I bring and plant seed under the rest of the tree where no grapevine is presently growing? Rabbi Yeshua told him that it's mutter since the fig tree serves as a useful purpose in its own right. A person doesn't consider it secondary to his grapevine, and therefore it does not have the status of a grapevine. Rabbi Shmuel then took Rabbi Yeshua from there to Beis Hamaganya, and showed him a grapevine trained on a part of a large branch of a sycamore stump that had many large branches. The kairos harbe are literally beams. The vine was trained over part of one of the branches growing out of a sycamore stump. Sycamore trees would be cut down to their stumps to encourage the growth of numerous new branches, and these branches were used for building beams. Here too, Rabbi Shmuel inquired whether the other species may be planted where no grapevine was growing. A sycamore has peiros, but its fruit is very shvacha quality. For this reason, sycamore trees were generally grown for their wood rather than peiros. So Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yeshua if the sycamore has the status of a fruit tree and is subject to the halachas of our Mishnah, or the status of a non-fruit tree, as it would have a din of ilan srak. So Rabbi Yeshua said to him, under this entire branch where the grapevine is growing, it's also to plant other species, v'hashar mutter, but under the rest of the branches, it's mutter to plant other species. Rabbi Yeshua answered that the sycamore is considered a ilan srak. Therefore, the entire branch which the grapevine is growing has the status of a grapevine, and is therefore also to plant other minim under that branch. However, since the sycamore's branches are especially large and significant, each branch is regarded as a tree in its own right, and is therefore permitted to plant other species under the other branches where no grapevine is going. The sycamore is different from other barren trees in this respect, as compared to what we mentioned in the previous Mishnah. Mishnah Hay, Ezo ilan srak. Which tree is considered a barren tree? Generally, the term ilan srak refers to a tree that does not produce fruit. However, over here, there's reason to say that even certain trees that do produce fruit have the status of a barren tree. As we just mentioned, that it's possible that a sadm shel shikma has peiros, but it still can be considered a ilan srak. The Mishnah explained previously that unlike a fruit-bearing tree, the owner of a barren tree considers it secondary to a grapevine that is trained on it. The tree therefore has the same status as a grapevine, and it's also to plant other minim even under the parts of the tree where the grapevine is not growing. The Mishnah now defines which trees are considered Elon Esrak in this context and are therefore secondary to the grapevine. So again, Ezu Elon Srak, which tree is considered a barren tree? Kol she'eino eisa peris, any tree that does not produce fruit. Only such trees are so insignificant that they are given the status of the vines they support. Therefore, as long as the tree produces fruit, it's considered a fruit tree, and it's permissible to plant other seed under parts of the tree where there's no grapevine growing at all. Remeir says, "Hakol Elon Srak, all trees, even those that do produce fruit, are viewed as Elon Srak, except for olive trees and fig trees. That is, all trees, even fruit-bearing trees, with the exception of olive trees and fig trees, are less important than grapevines. Therefore, once a grapevine is trained on a tree, the owner views the tree as secondary to the grapevine. It is thus prohibited to plant other seed under any tree, whether fruit-bearing or not, on which a grapevine is trained, even if the grapevine is not yet growing on that part of the tree. The only exceptions are olive trees and fig trees, which are very valuable." Rabbi Yossi says, "Kol she'ein kamohu noiton sadeh shleimos," any type of tree that is not planted to cover entire fields, hareza Elon Srak, is viewed as a barren tree. Rabbi Yossi holds that even fruit trees are not viewed as important unless growers plant entire orchards of such trees. Therefore, if a grapevine is trained on a type of tree that is not planted in that manner, the owner sees the tree as secondary to the grapevine. It thus has the same status as the grapevine, and planting beneath it is also. Only a tree that is so valuable that you would create entire orchards of such trees are planted remains significant, even if grapevines are trained on it. If a grapevine is trained on such a tree, planting beneath the rest of the tree would be mutter. Mishnah Vav, Piskei Aris. The Mishnah now goes back to the discussion of the halachas of an aris, the vineyard of trained vines discussed earlier in the parak. The Mishnah discusses the halacha of an aris that has a gap in the middle. We learned in the beginning of Parak Daled the halacha of a regular vineyard that was destroyed in the middle. Our Mishnah now discusses this halacha with regard to an aris. So Piskei Aris, in order for it to be mutter to plant other species in gaps of an aris, shmoina amas va'oid, the gaps must measure at least 8 amas and an additional amount, which would be 1 tefach. None of the measures mentioned by the Chachamim concerning a vineyard contain an additional amount except for Piskei Aris. In other words, all other measurements regarding climb of the vineyard, the Kilei HaKarim, are whole numbers. Elohein Piskei Aris. The following is the definition of gaps of an Aris. Aris Shachar Me'amsoid, an Aris containing 11 vines that was destroyed in its middle. The middle vine was removed, with 5 vines remaining on one side of the gap and 5 vines remaining on the other side. As explained at the beginning of the parak, a row of 5 vines that was trained on a wall qualifies as an aris. So our Mishnah is discussing an aris that originally had 11 vines trained on a wall. The middle vine was then removed, creating a gap in the row of vines. 5 vines remain on each side of the gap, with each group of 5 being an aris in its own right. In such a case, the halacha would be as follows: Im yesham shmeina amis, if the gap between the 2 sets of 5 vines is exactly 8 amis, liyav yizar l'sham, he may not bring and plant seed there. Shemaina amis va'oid, however, if it's 8 amis with an additional tefach, we give each group of 5 vines its work area of 4 amis, which may not be planted with other seed, and he may plant seed in the rest of the gap. That is, since each aris prohibits the 4 amis next to it, he may plant only tefach or more that stand between the 2 work areas. This halacha is more kuladik than that of a typical vineyard that was destroyed in the middle. A typical vineyard requires a gap of 16 amis, while the aris requires a gap of just 8 amas plus a tefach. This is because the empty space of the aris stands in a single row with the remaining 10 vines. In the destroyed vineyard, on the other hand, the remaining vines surround the empty space in the middle. Mishnah Zayin. We've seen at the beginning of the parak that when a group of trellised vines are considered an aris, other species may not be planted in their 4 amma work area. However, when they are not considered an aris, the vines are treated as individual vines and have a work area of just 6 tvachim, where other species may not be planted. The Mishnah discusses a case where the vines are not considered an aris. If trellised vines extend from a wall at each corner and finish near the corners, that is, there are no vines growing in the middle of the wall. We learned in the beginning of the parak that a row of 5 vines trained on a structure is considered an aris. In the case of this Mishnah, there are 5 trellised vines, 3 growing at one edge of a wall, and 2 growing at the other edge of the wall, with no vines growing in the center portion of the wall. And then normally, vines of an aris are planted with equal distances between them. These vines, however, are planted at the end with a large distance between the inner vines. Since the vines are not planted in the manner of a typical aris, the vines are not combined to be considered a vineyard. So notice in Le'av, I do say we give each vine 6 tvachim work area, where other species may not be planted, and we may plant the remainder of the space along the wall between the two groups. This halacha applies even if the wall is less than 4 amos long. Rabbi Yossi says, if there's less than 4 amos there, the wall is less than 4 amos long, Lo Yovi Zar Lasham, he may not bring and plant other seed there in any part of the wall. Rabbi Yossi agrees that when the vines are planted at the ends with a large distance between the inner vines, they do not qualify as an aris. Nevertheless, he holds that a 6 tefach separation between each vine and other species is not always enough. If the wall is not 4 amos long, the entire area near the wall is dedicated to the vine and is thus considered secondary to the vine. Therefore, it is also to plant other species there even after distancing 6 tvachim from the vines. This is in line with Rabbi Yossi's opinion in Parak Hay mentioned earlier. There, Rabbi Yossi said that if a vine is growing in a cleft, that's a crack in the ground, no other species may be planted here even at a distance of 6 tvachim from the vine unless the whole measures dalet al dalet amas. This is because the entire area is considered secondary to the vine and is thus also for other minim. In our mission, Rabbi Yossi is teaching that even when the area is not entirely enclosed, the area is considered secondary to the vine and the other species may not be planted here if the area is less than 4 amas long. Mishnah Ches. We have learned earlier in Mishnah Gimel that it's also to plant other species beneath the grapevine. In addition, we have learned that it's also also to plant other species under the aris, even under the parts of the aris where the vine is not yet growing, because the owner considers the aris secondary to the grapevine. So we're going to go back to that topic now. With regard to poles that jut out from the trellis, the term aris here is referring to the actual structure, the latticework structure used to support the grapevines, rather than the vines themselves. Furthermore, the Mishnah is discussing a single grapevine rather than a group of vines. Some of the poles extend horizontally from the roof of the trellis farther than actually needed. So there's like a pesel hayotze on the top, so to speak. So, hakana mayotze min ha'oris, with regard to poles that jut out from the trellis over the top, v'chas alein lepaskon, he didn't want to ruin, so he didn't cut them down. Literally, he had mercy on them. He has a rachmanus on them to cut it down. His intent when he left the extra length of the poles there was not in order to support the grapevine. He just didn't want to cut the extra pieces off because he wanted to keep the poles whole. He didn't want to cut the poles down. So connect and mutter, the halacha is that it's mutter to plant other species underneath them. Since the poles are not there to serve the grapevine, they are not secondary to the grapevine and do not have the status of the grapevine. Therefore, other species may be planted beneath the sections where the grapevine is not presently growing. Also, but if you made them extending from the trellis so that the new growth of vines should go out over them, it's also to plant other species beneath them even before the vines grow further. Since the poles are serving the grapevine, the owner considers them secondary to the grapevine. They therefore have the same status as the grapevine, and it's also to plant other minim underneath it. Mishnah Tes, Haperach hayotzis min ha'oris. If a new growth of grapevine of an oris extends from the trellis that's supporting it past the 4 amma work area of the oris, a row of at least 5 vines that are trained on a trellis is considered an oris with other species may not be planted within its 4 amas. Here, a vine has grown past the 4 amas. So, we imagine as if a metal weight, a plumb, probably pronounced plum without the B, silent B, a metal weight was hanging from the tip of the branch. So, also, when you measure an exact area, an exact line from where you can plant past it or not. So connect the osir, and it's also to plant other species beneath it. A metutelas is a metal weight that's attached to the end of a string. When it hangs down perfectly straight. A plumb line is used by builders in order to tell whether a wall was built straight. In our case, an imaginary plumb line is used to determine the area that is directly below the new growth. If seeds of another species are planted directly beneath the branch, both the grapes and the produce become usr. Planting in any other area is mutter as long as it's not within the work area, dalet amas from the base of the vines. V'chein badalis, the same would apply to single trained vine supported by posts. If the branch of the vine grows beyond the vine's 6 tefach work area, only the area directly beneath the branch is also for planting. The area around it is going to be mutter. And the work area of a single vine, again, is 6 tefachim, as we mentioned many times already. If a person stretches the branch of a grapevine from one tree to another tree, tachteha aser. It's also to plant other species beneath the branch. However, it's mutter to plant in the area around the branch as long as it's outside of the vine's 6 tefach work area. Sipka bechevel begemi, if the vine branch was not long enough to reach from the first tree to the second, and he extended it with a rope or a reed, tachas hasipuk mutter. It's mutter to plant other species beneath the extension of the rope or reed grass. If, however, he made the extension so that the new growth of the vine should grow over it, it's asur to plant other species beneath the extension. If the rope or reed is being used as an extender to connect the branch to the other tree, it's considered significant on its own, and planting other species beneath it is mutter. However, if the grower put the rope or reed there to support the vine as it grows further, the owner considers it secondary to the grapevine. Since it's serving the grapevine, it is thus like the poles of the previous Mishnah, and planting other species beneath it is going to be asur.